Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on, Bryan Boorstein. For whatever reason, dude, as I was saying that, I almost like in my mind said Dr. Bryan Boorstein. I don't know why. That was like about to come in my head. But yeah, dude, I was just telling you off air, this is my first guest podcast in 3-4 weeks. Luckily it's with you. We definitely are comfortable with each other here to where it's going to be easier. But yeah, man, happy to have you back on and catch up on everything today.
Yeah, always a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Jeff, yep. Dude, it's so funny. I almost said that. But yeah, man, so we were just also talking too. We haven't had you on since you had your race. I want to get an update on your training and kind of what's been going on with you. So love to hear an overview of the race, how it went, and then we'll switch gears to what you've been working on from a training perspective since then.
Yeah, it's wild that like we were talking off air. I thought I had been on and talked about the race, but it feels so long ago at this point. And in reality, the race was 2 months ago. So it was like 8 weeks ago. Literally, it was October 7th, and we're recording on December 7th. But yeah, it was 8 weeks ago. It went way better than I could have ever anticipated. It was a small race. So take whatever accolades I mentioned with a grain of salt. There was probably 50 total people in the race. And I finished fourth overall and second in my age category. And I was literally one wrong turn at the very end away from being in a sprint finish for first in my age category. I was neck and neck with this guy for the last 15 miles, and we were both in the 40 plus, 40 to 49 category. And he took a wrong turn about 3 miles from the finish line. And I was like, oh, I got this now. And I was going just confidently. And then he comes up behind me and he's like, man, it took everything I had to catch you. And so I was like, all right, cool. Because he had to work so hard to catch me, if in the sprint finish, I should be favored, right? And then I saw what I thought was the last turn to the finish line. And so I started sprinting. Turns out there was one more turn and I sprinted right by it. And then by the time I was able to stop, turn around, and go again, that dude was making the next final turn. And that was it, man. I finished 20 seconds behind him or something along those lines. So
Real quick on that. So do you, with the turn there, is that just like something that you don't know ahead of time? Or I'm not familiar with this at all. Do you know the track ahead of time, or is it like even it's obviously maybe the layout of it, but once you're actually like racing, it's okay. It's completely different mindset than at that
yeah,
point.
so you have GPS on your phone, and your phone is on like a rack mount on the front of your handlebars, so you can see the GPS and it's directing you where to go. The entire race, I had headphones in, and so I was just listening to the audible cues. Wait, that's not the word I'm looking for, but the cues that were used verbally. It would be like turn left in 200 meters or whatever, and so I would just listen to that, and I'd be like, "Word, there's a turn. It's 200 meters ahead. I take that turn." I'd taken my headphones out when that dude caught me because he was like, "Oh, it took everything to catch you," and I was like, "What?" And I took my headphone out, and then when I took it out, I didn't put them
Oh,
back in again. So I still had the map on my phone, but I wasn't paying attention to it. I was expecting the cues to come through my ears. So when the cue didn't come through, I thought the finish line was straight ahead, and it turned out it was left and then straight ahead. So
it sounds like he knew what he was doing there. He was trying to do that on purpose. Do you
yeah.
feel like being like neck and neck with this guy, do you feel like that kind of pushed you a little bit harder and like more than maybe you could have thought you could have given like initially? And obviously, I'm sure it's a little bit different than like how you train for it and everything like that.
Yeah. So the race ended up being 2 hours and 55 minutes for me, or 2:56, something like that. And I spent 2 hours of the 2 hours and 56 minutes in either zone 4 or zone 5. Way different than how I would train. The time that I wasn't in zone 4 or zone 5, I was in basically in zone 3. And then there was maybe 15 minutes in zone 2. It was like, it was way different than I would train. I was able to maintain, it was an average heart rate of 161, which is low zone 4. I'll say low to mid zone 4. So even though there were moments where I was up in zone 5, I think of that 2 hours between zone 4 and zone 5, it was like 1.5 hours in zone 4 and then 30 minutes in zone 5. And so zone 4 is that range where like it hurts and it hurts, but you have adrenaline and you're in a race. And so you can maintain it. It's like the highest level that you can maintain without falling off. So yeah, it was very different than the way I trained. But as far as staying motivated in the race and using that guy as a pacer, he actually was way ahead of me for the first 28 miles of the race. So it was a 50-mile race. It was miles 26 to 30. There was a 4-mile climb, about a 6-degree average grade for 4 miles. and he had been ahead of me the entire time. And it was on that climb that I finally caught him and passed him. And then there was a really long downhill after that. And it was a pretty technical downhill because it was not just like standard gravel, which is already technical. It was dirt with a bunch of deep crevices and then a bunch of like weeds and grass growing out of it. And I found out later that his focus was downhill mountain biking for like the first part of his career. And as a downhill mountain biker, you become really adept at those technical descents. Yeah. And I am very much not adept at technical descents. I passed the dude on a climb. And so I've been practicing aerobic fitness and climbing hills and things like that. So I passed him and I thought I was good to go. And then as soon as we got on that technical descent, he passed me. So he was almost out of my eyesight. Then the technical descent ended and I was able to, over the next 3 or 4 miles, catch him again. And it was at that point that we were maybe 10 miles from the finish line, 9 miles, something like that. So yeah, he and I rode together for more or less the last 9 miles. And for sure it kept me motivated, but it also motivated me to pass him and then to pass him again after he passed me. And so there was a lot of that kind of back and forth going on.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how it is. Not only, yes, being in good shape and like having good, like you said, aerobic, fitness, like that's important, but there's going to be certain parts of it where it is technical as well too. And like that can make a big difference. And clearly you had him beat on that, but then the technical side of things, his kind of experience showed there. And I feel like that probably comes, like you said, with just experience and whatnot on that side of things. How did you feel like afterwards? Did you feel pretty beat up? How was that part of it? Could you tell that you were in zone 4 and zone 5 for a long period of time? I'm just curious, just to maybe let people know how that can impact you from like a recovery standpoint and stuff like that. I'm curious to hear how those couple days went in that day.
Yeah, not so much. And I was really surprised by it because the last time I was on your podcast, I was talking about how it was 10 days before the race last time I was on. And I was talking about how I got sick after doing a ride that was meant to emulate the training to emulate the competition. So I had gone out maybe 2 weeks before the actual race to emulate it. And I did a 45 or 46 mile route. And I spent mostly the same amount of time in zone 4 and zone 5 as I did in the race. For whatever reason, I got back from that training ride and I felt awful. Like all the things that you probably expected. I didn't recover. I literally finished and I immediately laid down on my driveway and just looked up at the sky and I couldn't move for 15 minutes. I was just completely destroyed. And then I ended up getting sick after that, like a proper sickness for 3 or 4 days. And this time I had none of that. So it makes me wonder if maybe I was on my way to get sick anyways when I did that training ride versus it being a result of how hard I pushed myself. It's also hard to say because on the competition day, like I was so elated with how it all went. My initial goal going into it was I want to beat 3.5 hours. And then I thought, okay, my best possible outcome would be about 3:10 because 3:10 would mean that I was averaging about 15 miles per hour. And to come in at 2:56, which was better than even my wildest expectations would have been, I was just so elated, man. It's like nothing could have brought me down at that point. So I was riding that high for a few days. And if anything, I would say it was maybe a few days later where it hit me. And you could say that's post-training or post-race blues, as people say. Oh, I've been training for this thing for so long. Now what am I going to focus on? So maybe it was a piece of that. Maybe it was, hey, I really overextended myself and now I need to prioritize recovery. Ultimately, I don't really know, but yeah, the first few days after there was no problems and then it all hit me. It could also be a product of my body weight being so low. So that's another piece is since that race, literally 8 weeks ago, I've put on 14 pounds of body weight, 16 pounds from my low. So like last time I talked to you, I think it was right around the end of September that I hit my low, which was 180 pounds. And I'm up to 195, 196 right now. So really turned that around.
Would you attribute that to just more glycogen storage, or do you think maybe you did lose a little bit of muscle in the process? And so now it's just kind of getting some of that back, or what do you think?
Yeah, I have to have lost muscle. There's no way that I didn't because I was training significantly less. I think I told you at the end of it, I was down to 1 full body and 1 upper body session a week. And even my lower body, like the full body session, I was doing 2 sets of quads and 2 sets of hams. That was like for the week. So yeah, I'm sure I must have lost some muscle. It's I've talked about this on my podcast, but when you reflect back on any time you're in a deficit, when you're in the deficit, you always are really fast to say, "Oh, I feel great. Everything's fine. It's no big
Yeah.
deal. It's fine." Like you convince yourself of these things almost as this like defense mechanism or whatever. And then you put weight back on and it's just a completely different training experience. You realize how brittle you actually felt at the bottom of that deficit. But in the deficit, you don't feel it. But then once you put some body fat and begin to rebuild some of that glycogen and you're just in a surplus again, you just feel solid. Structurally, you go into sets and you expect to progress. And when I was at the bottom of the deficit, I would go into sessions and hope to not lose reps. And so it's a very different mindset going into training. And it really, I think, speaks to just how solid your body is and your mind when you're in a surplus versus when you're in a deficit.
Yeah, no, 100%. I can attest to that as well, too. Like you said, you don't really notice it. And it is pretty crazy to see how you really do see. I feel like it's, especially with hypertrophy training, it really, I think it does start to add up as you get later in your sets. And then as you do like later in your workouts, I feel like you really start to notice like being in a lower energy state at that point. That's where I feel like I just gas out. Whereas like when I'm eating more and in a surplus, it does seem like you're able to just push for longer, which I feel like makes sense from what they say on the research around when you're in a lower glycogen state and as well as a lower energy state as well too.
Yep.
So as far as the whole race goes, is there anything that you would do differently from like a cardio and or resistance training like perspective? And would you do it again, like this type of race again?
The latter question, yes, I'm already in the process of signing up. I've already signed up for one race and I'm in the process of signing up for a second and possibly a third. So they actually do a race in Boulder called the Old Man Winter Rally, and it's on February 4th. And so you do 30 miles from Lyons, which is about 30 miles from Boulder, to about Boulder. And I signed up for that. I'm not even training for biking right now, really, but I just figured it'd be so cool to go out in February, and who knows what the conditions are going to be like. It might be 18 inches of snow and 17 degrees out, or it might be 45 and sunny, which also can easily happen in Colorado. So we signed up for that one just as more of a fun thing. And then I have another one that I'm definitely going to do at the end of September, which is called the Rad Dirt Fest. It's in Colorado as well. And that's going to be either a 50 or a 60 mile course with about 5,000 feet of vert. And so that's one of the things I really wanted in my next race was I wanted to have one with much more vertical, because we have all these mountains like right here in Boulder. I live literally a 3-mile bike ride away from mountains. And the race that I did before only had 2,300 feet of vert over 50 miles, which really means that you're not doing a ton of vert if it's over 50 miles. And so this next one, it doubles the vert, basically goes to 5,000. And I really want an excuse to have to train climbing because I don't enjoy it. I'm really bad at it. And I've gotten to the point now where I'm really good at flatland. I can keep up with most people on flatland that I bike with, obviously not people that bike for their thing. But yeah, people at my level, like I can keep up with them on flatland, but I usually still get dropped on long climbs. And so I really want an excuse to have to go and attack the mountains and do more climbing. So with that said, yes, I'm going to change my training. And the things that I'll probably change are that I will probably go back to a much more reduced frequency on my training during the period of time where I'm training heavily for the bike race. And so this kind of speaks into how I want to just periodize my training year overall going forward now, is that I want to basically have October, November, December, January, February, and some of March be focused primarily on hypertrophy and lifting weights and rowing, which is the new thing I'm going after, which we can talk about at some point if you want. But doing a lot less cardio during that period of time. Even with my rowing, I'm doing about 2 to 3 hours of cardio a week now. And when I was doing the bike race prep, I was doing 8 to 11 hours a week of cardio, which is basically like a part-time job of biking. Luckily, I can multitask when I bike and I can learn shit and listen to podcasts like yours. And I feel like at that point, it's providing me some benefit as well for my profession, which is cool. Plus, it gives me something to talk about on podcasts, which also makes it sort of a work expense, which is just awesome on so many levels. But But yeah, that's the plan. And then you basically spend April through September focusing on biking more. And I think what I'll do with the training as far as reducing frequency is I haven't fully decided on it yet. Though the thing that I did last year where I dropped down to one full body and one upper body session per week, that worked really well in the last 4 to 6 weeks before the race when it's really ramping up. But I don't think that I'm going to need to drop down quite that low initially. What I would love to do is have a 3-day a week that's maybe a lower day, an upper day, and then a full body day. Where maybe the full body day is a little bit more upper biased. So you're still hitting legs twice a week, but one of the days is much lower volume, which I think would have significantly less impact on my biking. So as long as I can put my zone 2 rides around the leg day, because I know I'm going to be sore, I'm going to be fatigued, I don't want to be doing hills and shit like that. And then on the other days, the upper body day and then the full body day, I can put more of the more leg dominant climbing stuff in there with in intervals, intensity and stuff like that.
Is the thought process there with like doing like you said, a little bit higher frequency on the upper body versus lower is, hey, you're probably hitting your legs a lot in cycling as well too. And so it's, again, I know you're probably not getting a great stimulus, but you are getting some sort of stimulus when you're cycling.
Yeah, I actually had a number of people that cycle and lift, like hybrid athletes, contact me on DM and ask me if I noticed any quad growth from the biking. And they were asking that because they noticed quad growth from biking. And I did, honestly. It's tough to say because my body weight plummeted so much that it didn't appear like my quads were growing per se. But when I looked at them at 182 pounds compared to what I feel like they look like at 182 pounds 2 years ago when I did a diet with no biking and it was just walking and dieting, I would say they looked more pumped and more full and just generally better this time around than they did that time around. And I can only really attribute that to biking or assume that I gained hypertrophy in the last couple of years that is being manifested now. It's tough to say, man. As we've talked about before, I'm in my early 40s now. It's really tough to nail down whether progress is truly happening. And it's just, there's a number of reasons I train now, and I don't know if continuing to pursue that unicorn of hypertrophy is necessarily on the top of my totem pole.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's so freaking hard to know if you actually are. And is it even, I feel like if it's not super noticeable, it doesn't really matter at that point. You really just have to mess around to see what works best at that point, and just trust that what you're doing is at least maintaining it and whatnot, especially when you have other pursuits that maybe are a little bit higher on the priority list. So it sounds like from a training perspective, you're still TBD in terms of how exactly you're going to do that. But it sounds like the big thing is in the beginning, you might try to do a little bit more and try to hold on to that for as long as you can, essentially there with that this time around. In terms of
I tried to do that last time. So okay. I think I took it too far last time. Last time I was following a 4 to 5 day per week training program. And it was one of my own kind of the way that I do my weird splits where they're not actually like a push pull legs or an upper lower. It's just like these weird mix ups of muscle groups with each other, just because I'm trying to hit my necessary volumes for each. So I tried to stick with that for way too long. I don't think I even ditched that until mid-August. So I went all the way until I was 6 weeks out from my competition, still trying to train like a bodybuilder, even though I was putting in 8+ hours a week on the bike. And it was just too long. I think I pushed it maybe 2 or 3 weeks too long. So this time I'm going to have learned from that, and I'm going to be aware of my signs. And I'm also going to understand that I think I was really scared last time because I've never not trained like a bodybuilder since 2016 when I left CrossFit. So I was a little bit scared, I think, of losing muscle mass and losing my identity as well. So this time around, I'm going to be much more able to relinquish that a little bit sooner. And I don't think I have nearly as much of my identity tied to being a bodybuilder at this point.
That makes a lot of sense. I definitely feel like the first time you do something like that and it's a little bit different, it is hard to let go of that identity, right? I feel like that's happened a lot of times with clients where maybe they've done something like some way in the past and you're trying to change it just a little bit, and it's maybe the first time they go through it, they're making some changes, but there's still more there, and you go through that once and you trust the process a little bit more, and then I feel like next time you're like, okay, now I can really hone in on this and make sure that like you said, dial back the weight training and understand that I'm sure you feel a little bit better about, you did lose a little bit of muscle, but I'm sure you feel better about maybe it coming back when you start training normally again and things like that. Or hey, maybe you figure out a way to potentially maintain a little bit more this next time around. Is there anything from there that you think you could do? Or is it just, hey, with how much I need to cycle and stuff like that, that's just going to be part of the process?
Yeah, I think that it's the latter. You have to dump weight to become more efficient
Yeah.
at biking. And so if you're going to bike a lot, your body begins to adapt to that, and you just shift a little bit of kind of the muscle fiber makeup to be a better cyclist, because that's what's dominating your time at that point. And your body figures it out. Your body's pretty smart. It was weird because like it took I maintained low 190s in body weight forever. And then even though I was biking a ton, it's just my body didn't want to, it was just stuck. It was like it wouldn't go below 190. And then as soon as it did, it dropped 10 pounds in 4 weeks. It was crazy. I went from 190 to 180, and it felt like every day the scale was down another half pound or something. It was wild, because I guess the body just finally was convinced that, okay, like this guy's not a weightlifter anymore. He's a biker. So we need to make him a better biker if he's going to keep doing this. The body's super smart in that way.
Cardio, I had this realization last night. I was watching a video, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. But I never really thought of it this way from a cardio perspective. But it's a lot of people do cardio, I feel like, for the energy expenditure. But I feel like there becomes that point where, if you want to continue adapting from a cardiovascular standpoint, your body therefore has to be it adapts from an energy expenditure. That's a good thing, but it's also a negative from energy expenditure standpoint. Is that kind of right there? Am I thinking, or did that make sense what I was trying to say?
So you're saying that you like essentially energy compensation occurs and your body like gets smarter and figures it out on its own type thing.
But at the same time, that's a good sign, because that means you're probably adapting from a cardiovascular standpoint, right? You're becoming more efficient essentially with energy. So it's like kind of that trade-off there where it's, you're like the price of adapting of getting that adaptation of better cardiovascular fitness is, hey, you're probably going to expend a little less energy while doing that amount.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I do with clients that are trying to specifically use cardio to lose body fat is I try to put them on the type of cardio machine that they're the least efficient at. Yeah. So I'll have them do like a week or two on one that they suck at, because they're going to burn way more calories. And then we'll switch to another one that they suck at, because if they're like an ex-biker and you put them on a bike, yeah, they're going to feel great on the bike because that's something that they're really good at. But because they're so good at it, they're going to burn a lot less calories, which is not going to help their fat loss goal. So it really is the inverse of what you would do if you were trying to train to actually get better at a cardio pursuit. We're trying to train to not be good at a cardio pursuit so that you can burn more calories. I think that kind of supports what you're saying.
And this made me think too, where this is where I think, from a strictly body composition fat loss perspective, I get the, okay, if you want to switch it up, like that's going to burn more calories. But this is why I'm also wondering if like even walking can be helpful from that standpoint, because you're not actually getting that. Once you start walking for a while, you're not really getting that cardiovascular adaptation anymore. So that's already there. So it's like you just moving you're not going to get that, if that makes sense what I'm trying to say there.
Yeah, dude, I think people adapt really quickly to walking, at least from my personal experience and that I've seen of clients. In my prior years where I would just diet and walk, I would walk, by the end of diets, I'd be up to 15,000 steps per day average. Like I'd have some days at 18,000, some days at 12, whatever, but it would average out to about 15,000, which is a shit ton of steps for someone to do during a day. And I would still be down at 2,400, 2,300 calories in the last couple of weeks of the diet. And I was hungry all the time. And it literally felt like all this walking I was doing, it felt robotic. It didn't actually feel like anything was happening aside from, hey, I'm supposed to get these steps, so I'm doing these steps. But it was like very monotonous. It was just putting one foot in front of the other. There wasn't like any pep in my step or anything like that. It was just like this grinding sludge that I was trying to get through. And I don't actually think that the walking contributed to burning calories a whole ton. I do think there's a ton of value in walking for health outcomes. And obviously for anyone where walking actually is a stimulus for them, like somebody extremely out of shape, walking can get you into zone 2. That's amazing. But once you become like a good, efficient walker, walking is just not the thing that's going to move the needle on burning calories.
Which is actually the opposite of what I was like thinking there. My thought that I had with that was like, hey, because you're not like getting that cardiovascular adaptation, I was thinking maybe from a calorie burn standpoint, you don't necessarily adapt as quickly. But I have also seen it too, where like you said, you just keep ramping up your walking, especially in an energy deficit. And I do think that you really do start to see that compensation happen from that standpoint.
Yeah, we get better at it. So
Yeah.
that's one thing as well. But even when you think about the total calories that you burn from walking, like I'm a big dude, right? I'm like 190 plus pounds. It takes me about 2,500 steps to burn approximately 100 calories. And so if I'm doing 15,000 steps at 2,500 per 100 calories, that's 600 calories a day that I'm burning from walking. But that is assuming I did 0 steps just normally. That's not true either. Like on a normal day where I don't even leave the house, I still get over 6,000 steps. So now the delta between just me normally living and the calories I'm burning from walking, it's more like 3,500 or 3,000, or sorry, 350 or 300 that I'm burning throughout the day from walking. So I'm committing all of this time, like 15,000 steps, man. We're talking about 2 hours of walking or more. And I'm doing all of that for 300 calories or 350 calories. One bad decision at night of, oh, I'm going to have this handful of almonds and half of a protein bar because I'm hungry before bed. And then it's shit, could have just walked 6,000 steps and not done that. So I think that as far as the calculus of calories burned per time, walking also is a bit inefficient in that way too.
Yeah, I've definitely shied away. Like I really try to push clients away from those like really high amounts of steps because they like you said, I think once you get past that 6 to 10,000 mark, it's like the return on investment just goes down the drain, especially from a time perspective. And just like you said, it gets freaking boring after a while doing it that way too. So cool, man. I think we summed up the race pretty well there on that and some changes you would make. So I'm curious to hear what's going on now. And yeah, I know you're working with Dr. Mike Nelson on some cardio. So curious to hear how training's going now and stuff like that.
Training is going great. To be honest, training feels so good. It's extremely enjoyable. And it's a huge contrast to what I was feeling 2 months ago when I was just completing the bike race and getting back into training again. I just completed my first full mesocycle. The way that my program is designed right now is that it's a 10-day microcycle. So I do 5 of those. And so it's 50 days for a meso. And I just at the end of this meso hit my top all-time number on a number of lifts. The ones that really mean a lot to me, though, is I have the little hack press machine that I use. And I've been doing it for a long time now with a 3-second pause at the bottom where the quads are stretched. And I just matched my all-time PR on that, which was set either December or January before I really started getting crazy with all the biking stuff. And so about a year ago, actually. And so I tied that number at the end of this meso, which felt amazing. It gives me like a lot of confidence going into the next meso that I actually may be able to set a PR on it, which is crazy because that movement in that exact way has been in my program for over a year now, pretty consistently. So that's great. And then my bicep and tricep stuff has improved more than any other lift in the last mesocycle. So I actually didn't notice it during the mesocycle, but now I'm in the like deload reset week of the next meso. And so what I do in that deload reset week is I try to use the same weights as I did in the prior deload meso, or I up it 2.5 pounds and then I try to match reps. But either way, I want to see either a slight increase in load or a slight increase in reps at the same load for the coordinated week. So week 1 of that meso to week 1 of this meso. And in all of my bicep and tricep movements, I've increased 3 reps, which has blown my mind using the same weights as the prior meso that I'm getting 3 more reps to the same reps from failure. So that's crazy. I did not expect that to happen. That's probably the most actual tangible progress I've seen on something in a really long time. And I'm back up to getting close to my all-time PRs in the behind the back cable lateral raise, in my what else? Oh yeah, my pull down variations and stuff like that. So yeah, really like chest press variations. Everything's basically back to where I would want it to be. And I think a lot of that correlates to the increasing body weight and stuff like that too.
Well, some of these PRs, is that just, do you attribute that to just, hey, this is part of the process. At some point you want to progress over time, or do you attribute it to like, obviously you said the body weight, but any cardio type stuff, anything like that? Or is it just, hey, this is just the process and you're going to get stronger like over time if you keep working at it?
I'm sure doing less cardio has played a huge role into my body being able to take more of its resources and apply them to strength and hypertrophy. Yeah, cutting cardio from 8+ hours down to 2 or 3 hours is obviously like a 300 or 400% decrease.
I meant like what you did. Do you think that is like showing off, like showing up now? You know what I'm saying? At this point, obviously, yeah. Go ahead.
I don't think cardio, I'm suspect of cardio improving someone's strength and hypertrophy outcomes with this much experience.
Yeah.
There just aren't a lot of things that are going to move the needle. And I don't think something catabolic is going to be the thing that's going to move the needle.
Yeah. Cool. So back to training. So you said it's always interesting to hear how you set up your cycles and stuff like that, because like you said, you don't always work on that like 7-day week. Yours is kind of, like you said, a 10-day cycle there, which I think is pretty cool and it just goes to show that work sometimes can be constrained by that weekly calendar there on that. Is there anything that you're like specifically focused on in your training right now from like a muscle growth standpoint, or is it just a well-balanced program?
Yeah, it's pretty well balanced. So it's a push-pull legs split where there's 2 rotations of it. So it's like the first one is over 5 days, and then I change the movements and I do it again over 5 days. But I even made a further modification to the program, and I switched the leg day into hams and quads. So I'm actually training 8 out of 10 days or 4 out of 5 days, because it's push, pull, hams, quads, rest, or push, pull, rest, hams, quads is the way I've been implementing it. So I get a day of rest between pull and hams. Because of the way that's organized, it feels a little bit like a lower body specialization, just because I am training legs 4 times over the 6 total sessions. Wait, is that right? No, 8 sessions, 4 legs 4 times over 8 sessions. And because I'm separating hams and quads, it really allows me to put an extreme level of focus and energy into each. So my hamstring day is 5 total work sets, and my quad day is 5 total work sets. So literally I go into that day and that's all I have to focus on, which feels very manageable. And in some ways it actually feels less strenuous than an upper body push or an upper body pull day, just because there's so many more movements and so many more sets to do on those days. Like those days have 10 to 13 sets each. So doing 5, even though they're much more demanding movements, it really feels mentally, it feels like it's not a huge undertaking. And then physically, I don't feel compromised or taxed from those individual leg days either. So I very much look forward to them, which is a unique property for me. I haven't always looked forward to leg days. They've been demanding and cause a little bit of anxiety and all of that stuff. Yeah. So that's been amazing. That's been a revelation. We can talk about this if you're interested, but I've already decided that my next cycle, when this meso ends, which will be mid-January, I am going to go to an intelligent bro split, and I've already been thinking about how I'm going to construct that. So
love to hear about it. Yeah, for sure. I think that would be a really good insight for a lot of people.
Yeah. Essentially, for anyone that has heard the bro split isn't evidence-based, et cetera, it seems like the evidence has flip-flopped on that quite a bit. As you and I have talked about, frequency per muscle group seems to not be quite as vital as the evidence-based space would have thought a few years ago. And it really seems that if you're going to split a muscle group to do it multiple times a week, it should be because you're doing more than 10 sets in a given session. And I don't think any of my sessions are going to have 10 sets for a given muscle group. So the way that I'm going to set it up is going to be really similar to how I used to train when I had Max OT in the early 2000s. I've been reflecting a lot on my experience with Max OT recently, because I've been having a number of DM conversations with these young guys in their early 20s, and they tend to have this idea of always thinking the grass is greener somewhere else. And I remember those feelings. I remember being like, I don't want to commit even 3 months to a program that isn't going to move me in the direction of my goals. Yep. And then 25 years later, I look back and I'm like, you were worried about 3 months. And so I talk to these kids now and I'm like, hey, here's what you should do. If you're worried about intensity versus volume, train with high volumes for a year and use 3 RIR, and then train with really low volumes and go to failure for a year. And he's like, but a year? What if I do the thing that's not going to get me the best results? And I'm just like, chill out, bro. Wax on, wax off. So anyways, going back to my bro split, when these guys that I talked to on DM ask me, like, what were the most productive years of training for you? What did you learn from the different ways that you trained? And what I always reflect on is that the best gains that I ever had in my training career were during the period of time where I did Max OT. And you can argue a number of confounding variables there, like those were the years that I was eating a ton of food at the dining hall in college, and I was turning into a man, like growing body hair and the most testosterone flowing through my body. And so maybe I could have trained any other style and I would have romanticized that and been like, wow, I really got great results training super slow, or whatever fucking maniacal way there is out there that you could imagine someone trains, or Menser, like one set every 2 weeks. That's the way I gained the most results. But for me, it was max OT. And so max OT is a bro split. And the way that I would set max OT up was that it would be chest day, back day, leg day, shoulder day, arms day. So there was 5 days in a week. This time around, it's going to be similar, but I'm not going to do leg day. It's going to be hamstring day and quad day. So I'm going to train it 6 days a week out of 7 days, but each session is going to be 45 minutes or less, because I'm literally just going to go in and have one muscle group to train. The other things I'm going to do to change it from like a typical bro split is I'm going to make sure that the arm day has either dips or close grip bench press, so that I get a little bit of auxiliary chest work in on the second day. And then it's going to have some sort of pull up as well, probably a supinated pull up to focus more on elbow flexion. And that's going to also then train my lats and upper back as well. So upper back and chest, boom, you get those twice a week, but it's like a very small dose on the second day. And you're getting the auxiliary benefit of training your arms because it's on arm day. And then I'm probably going to take lateral delts, and I'm likely going to do 2 sets of lateral delts on another day. So maybe it's chest day, because shoulder day is going to be Thursday. So it's probably likely that I'll throw 2 sets of lateral delts at the end of chest day. And then it'll basically be like chest and lateral delts, then back. But back is going to be a big day because it's going to have upper back, which includes rear delts. And then it's also going to have lats, obviously. And so that day may have 10 to 12 working sets or something along those lines. Hamstring day, I'm going to do more than just the 5 sets I've been doing, since the frequency is going to be lower. So currently I'm doing 5 sets, but it's every 5 days. I'm going to be probably doing more like 8 sets of hamstrings, maybe even 9 on one day. And then I'll do the same thing for quads. So those leg days individually are going to be much more demanding, but I'll still separate out the hams and quads. And so basically everything in the upper body is going to still get trained twice a week, whether it's a direct or an indirect. It's going to get some stimulus. And then as far as the lower body, yeah, we're just going to train hams once a week and quads once a week. But I'll tell you what, man, my upper body takes very little damage compared to my legs.
Yep.
And I think if I did 8 to 9 sets of hams and 8 to 9 sets of quads, dude, I think I'd be sore for 4 or 5 days anyways, and I won't be ready to train them again till that 7-day period. So I'm really excited about this. It really was motivated. The bro split idea was motivated by me splitting hams and quads into separate days, and how much better of a focus I can put on a muscle group when I only have to train one muscle group. And I want to be able to take advantage of that and apply that same level of focus to all my muscle groups.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because like you said, it definitely was, oh, hey, don't do a bro split. But like you said, frequency is really only there, from my understanding, if you can get more quality volume in overall. I mean, like you said, that kind of like around 10-ish sets seems to be where maybe things like fall off. And that makes sense from like a mental standpoint more than anything, I think, at least, just like staying focused. Then you start to run into maybe less quality work. But as you were saying that, it got me thinking about, you probably, while it is technically a bro split, and you hit on this multiple times, you do end up indirectly hitting muscle groups probably more than you think. So it ends up like you don't actually truly hit, I feel like, a muscle group one time per week, right? Like it ends up being multiple times per week anyways, because even in your pulling stuff, you're going to be hitting your biceps at some point in those. So it's like your biceps. And then, like you said, even the arm day, you're going to be doing the supinated. It's going to hit your arms, but you're also going to hit back a little bit. Same thing with like your pushing stuff. You're probably hitting a little bit of tricep and front delt and stuff like that too. So it ends up being a little bit more there anyways. And even depending on what you do from a quad focus standpoint, probably even a hack squat maybe is going to hit glutes just a tiny bit as well too, a little bit. So you are going to get that overlapping a little bit there with that. So it ends up like, yeah, it's technically a bro split, but you do hit a muscle group multiple times per week, which is probably good.
Yeah, dude, if you think about even a standard bro split that isn't like intelligent in quotes the way that I designed it, if someone has a chest day, back day, shoulder day, arm day, and leg day, their triceps are getting hit 3 times a week, because you have shoulder pressing, you have chest pressing, and then you have direct work on the arm day. Biceps are getting hit twice a week because you have pull day or back day, and then you have bicep day. So biceps are getting hit twice. And then, yeah, so chest and back would be the only two that wouldn't be hit twice. But by adding those pull-ups and dips or whatever onto your arm day, then you are now hitting them twice. And yeah, to your point, you are going to be hitting glutes both days. So your glutes are getting hit twice. Literally the only muscle groups that aren't actually hit twice are quads and hams. And so looking at even a typical bro split, it's never just one muscle group per week. There is a ton of auxiliary work. And I've heard Eric Helms talk about that too. Like in the similar example to what I said is, hey, there's a lot of crossover that people aren't accounting for.
What about calves? And then I'm also curious, what does your shoulder day look like? Because you mentioned you're going to hit delts on chest. Yeah. So I'm curious to hear about those 2 days.
Yeah, calves I don't do anymore.
Okay.
I went through a period a couple of years ago of thinking I might compete. And then I think that at least for now, that ship has sailed. I'm not completely ruling it out for my mid to late 40s or whatever. But I think for this period of time while my kids are still young, I just don't want to do it. I don't have it in me. I've ruled out competing. And so I've just said, fuck it on calves. I never really did them much anyway. I program abs into my workout and I do them about 1 out of every 4 times. So they show up twice throughout my microcycle, and I'll usually do them once every 2 microcycles.
Real quick, I will say on that, if there's one thing that I skip that you program in, if I'm like busy, it's like, all right, abs, or that's going to be the one that takes the back seat there. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Would you rather skip abs than calves?
Yes, 100%. I still, whether I'm competing or not, I still like to train my calves because I feel like you can get some really productive training like super quick out of calves. I feel like the time commitment's not super high on that, but yeah.
I will actually say that I do calves actually quite often, but not as part of my general program. I actually use them after dinner when it's cold out, and I usually would go for a walk to help with prandial glucose sensitivity and all that stuff. And I will do calf raises on the stairs after dinner if it's too cold for me to go out and walk, just as a way to use the glucose that I just ate to get some movement in. Yeah. So I'll stand on the stairs and I'll do 10 to 12 single leg calf raises, then switch legs, and I'll do that 3 or 4 times. So I'm getting actually some decent calf work, but it's definitely not progressive and it's definitely not weighted. It's just being done. But
I feel like with calves too, they probably do get indirectly hit a lot. So it's like one of those things where if you want to grow them and you have the time, it's obviously you're going to want to train them. But if you're fine with them and you don't want to commit the time, that's definitely a muscle group that you can just be like, all right.
Yeah. I genetically have pretty decent calves too. My dad had huge ones. So yeah, I don't even remember what you would ask, like a different question.
I also would ask about your shoulder day.
Oh yeah. Shoulder day. Yeah. Yeah, so I think shoulder day is going to be a pretty thorough shoulder day. I'm definitely going to focus the majority of the work onto the lateral delt because I do think that is the most important one when we're talking about physique pursuits. But I am going to have an anterior delt press of some sort. So when we talk about training chest, hey, you're getting a little bit of upper chest work that way too, right? So now we might be hitting chest 3 times because we have the chest day, we have the anterior delt press, and then we have the dips on the arm day. So now we're getting a bunch of chest work in. But yeah, I'll have an anterior delt press of some sort, whether that's with cables or dumbbells. And then I'll definitely do probably 2 lateral delt movements, probably a short overload followed by a lengthened overload. I really have been liking the combo of Y raise and dual cable lateral raise. So I'll likely stick with those 2. And then I will probably do 1 rear delt exercise. And that will also help me accumulate some back volume. So now we're getting back volume in 3 days because we have a back day and then we have pull-ups on the arm day. And then we have a little bit of rear delt work on the shoulder day. So I think using that shoulder day to have some pushing and some pulling in there adds more of that frequency to your training. It really is like an intelligent bro split, so to speak.
Yeah. And actually, out of curiosity, I've been meaning to ask you this. Y raises, would you consider that more rear delt or is that more lateral delt movement there on that?
Cass calls it an omni movement, which means it trains a whole bunch of things. So I think what you're going to find is that the initial range of motion is lateral delt. And then as it comes up overhead and back, you're going to get more rear delt and mid to lower trap. So you really get like some upper back in there. And then you also get the lateral delt piece as well. So it's just an amazing movement. I think it's great for shoulder health and it's great for aesthetics.
Okay. I'm glad that you said that because I was like, I do feel it in my delts, like side delt a little bit, but also I feel so that just confirmed how I should feel on that. So that's good to know.
If I've been using some bottom partials for Y raises, which I don't think I've programmed for you yet. But if we have.
Okay, like towards the end of the cycle, yeah.
Okay. So I find that when you do the bottom partials on the Y raises, where you're really just coming up maybe to parallel, it starts to resemble a lateral raise much more. And I think that you should feel that a bit more in your side delt.
Yeah, it makes sense that like initial movement, like you said, when you do, it does, like you said, it does. You have
to come the abduction, the lateral raises are about abducting the arms. So as long as the arms are moving away from the body, it should be lateral delt. And then as they move back toward the center of the body after they've reached their maximum width, that's when you're going to get a little bit more of that upper back trap.
That's also a movement too that, so for example, Allie, like when she was in the gym, like that's the one that those old men will come up to her and be like, oh, don't do that. It's bad for your shoulders. You got to do it this way. You know what I mean? That's the one that that's just one of those movements I feel like there. Cause it's like you said, it's good for your shoulder health, but I think just the way it looks, I guess older people that have been in the gym.
I think it's much better for the shoulders when you do it in external rotation. So I do think you could have people that have some kind of jamming issues in the AC joint if you're doing them palms down. Y raises, but if you have your thumb up, so thumb up would be external rotation. I think you'll find that a much more comfortable position.
That's good to know. I know you use those cuffs. I use like the handle, so sometimes I do end up getting that way. So maybe I'll have to. I have been like, because I've seen you do it, so I've always tried to focus on that, but I end up finding myself going this way. So I need to make sure I'm really staying in that position.
Well, you can use the strap of the D handle instead of the D handle itself. You can push up against the strap.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that'll be super interesting to hear about your training. I guess real quick too, before one question, this is how much time do you have? Do you have a particular time you need to be finished by?
Let's go like 15 or 20 more minutes.
Yeah, perfect. I did want to quickly touch base on your thoughts around cardio. I know that you've been training this a little bit more lately, and I'm just curious if you've had any changes or insights into like how you would go about it, how you would program it for people. We had this talk about zone 2 in the past. Are you still pretty big proponent of that? Because lately I feel like I've heard a little bit of a pushback of, hey, your overall volume matters most there with that in terms of how much zone 2 you need to do. So I'm just curious if your views have changed with cardio, working with Dr. Mike, anything like that.
So you're saying that the views, are you speaking to what Milo has come out with about
No. Actually, it's not anybody in particular, but I'm just curious, like maybe that was one thing that I saw at some point, but it's not anything particular from any one person, just more what I've seen in terms of, hey, like zone 2 is great, but it's also dependent on how much overall volume you're doing. Yeah. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts around that, or if you've changed just anything generally around cardio over the last little bit.
So as far as general health outcomes are concerned, for most people, I think walking around 10K steps a day and lifting weights is going to get you the majority of the health benefits that you want. I do think that zone 2 would help if there are certain aspects of your health that you would like to improve upon, specifically like glucose management, mitochondrial function, how that might impact different aspects of cardiovascular disease and blood pressure and things along those lines, cholesterol management. So if you're walking 10K steps and you're lifting weights and you're still having some of these blood markers come back out of range or pushing the boundary of where you feel uncomfortable with where they are, then I do think that zone 2 work is something that could potentially help you get to that next level and lower some of those like poor blood markers. It's also obviously important if you have any goals that involve anything beyond being healthy and looking good. So if you want to be able to go run a 5K with your friends and not be gasping for air halfway through, then you should probably do some zone 2 cardio. Even if you do that on the bike a couple times a week, that's going to help you be better at processing all of this oxygen consumption and expel CO2 and all those things that you need to do to be able to keep running during a 5K. I also think that personally, I have found that doing the zone 2 work has really helped me with like mental acuity, focus, general energy throughout the day. I may have mentioned this on a podcast with you before, but the example I always use is that my kids would come home from school and always want to play. And when I was just doing steps and lifting, I'd often be tired at the end of the day, and I'd be on the couch and they'd be like, let's go play baseball or let's go for a bike ride or whatever. And I'd be like, oh no, can we just hang out and play like a card game or watch a movie or something along those lines? And now they come home from school and they want to do shit. And I'm like, yeah, let's do this. I'm ready to go. And so it's crazy because I'm actually expending more energy because I'm doing zone 2 work and doing cardio. And yet that's allowing me to have more energy as the day goes on to be able to play with my kids and be more productive in that manner. I've found tremendous benefit in it. I know there are critics, like specifically Milo has basically did a whole analysis of how if you're doing sufficient steps and lifting, like you're getting most of the health benefits. And to that, I agree. Like I explained, it's just, if you're looking for that little extra, I think it's probably worth exploring.
Gotcha. Yeah, I actually didn't see it. I'll have to look at that. But based on what you just said there, yeah, that makes sense. Like from an overall health perspective, like you said, movement's going to be key there. But if you do want to obviously improve your cardiovascular health, which has some or fitness, right? Beyond that, it's like you do probably need to do some dedicated training towards that to make sure to get that adaptation. So that makes sense there on that. And myself too, like I've definitely seen a difference. Like I did that 5K with Allie a month and a half ago. I would have freaking died. I feel like if I hadn't been doing any zone 2. So that made it super easy. And I felt like I held a lot back and I would have been able to push a little bit more. And then even in hockey too, like I've noticed a big difference. Like it does take me a little bit longer to gas out. Like I can just go longer and whatnot. I haven't yet seen a huge change in training. I'm sure again, that would probably come with maybe a little bit more dedicated, like cardio work or something like that. Maybe, I don't know, in terms of like recovery in between sets, but I haven't like really paid attention to that. I may actually be recovering a little bit quicker in between sets.
You've never been a guy that has extended lengthy rests anyways. Like you and I have discussed, and I'm always the guy that wants 3 to 5 minutes of rest between things. And I think you've always been ready to go a little bit faster. So yeah. I think the magnitude of improvement that you would notice from zone 2 would also be smaller.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say after being gone for a couple weeks, maybe I'm just at a tiny bit of a higher body weight and maybe my sleep wasn't as great, but I definitely noticed like I was tiring out a little bit more in hockey. Now, again, that could have been sleep related. We had a wedding the night before and whatnot, but we'll see there on that. It'll be interesting to see how it does now that I'm like eating more in a surplus now at this point. I did want to end this conversation today, just briefly going over my training real quick, just talking about just some rationale behind it and what we're doing there with it. And then any questions that I have that come up. So I don't know if you maybe want to hit on what we're doing and then, any questions that come up, I'll ask on that.
Yeah. So we are doing a back or a lats and tricep specialization. So not back per se, but lats specifically. Obviously, anytime you train the lats, you're going to have some upper back come along for the ride. But I really love the design of this program. So you and I did a episode on specialization cycles specifically maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to link. Yeah, maybe if you want to link to that episode in the show notes, but I talked about all the different levers that you can pull when doing a specialization cycle. And two of the big ones are volume and proximity to failure. And then frequency is also another one that I really like to use. And when we look at the design of this cycle, we have lats, chest, and triceps on the first day. And lats and triceps are the two focus muscle groups. So those are getting hit on the very first day right off the bat. Then the next day is quads and lateral delts. So neither of those are priority muscle groups. And thus we're doing a little bit lower volume there. And we are also going to work slightly further from failure. You won't notice a ton of that. One thing I am implementing into both leg days where we have quads and then hams on a different day is a same muscle group superset. And this is really just to drive a whole ton of stimulus into the targeted area with less time commitment and less setup and having to move between movements and stuff. So on the first day with quads, we have a superset of leg extension to walking dumbbell lunge, which falls into that way that I love to organize training with the short lengthened setup. And then we finish with pendulum squat. So we have basically 6 total working sets. If you want to count 2 from leg extension, 2 from lunges, and 2 from pendulum squat.
And real quick, 2 weeks of doing that, I was less sore this week, but I was freaking sore for a couple of days after that. Like I felt that just from that. And I'm sure it was probably that new stimulus of the back-to-back there that probably, and just lunges in general, but yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The novel stimulus effect and then repeated bout will come in and take care of that in a little bit. Then the next day after quads and lateral delts, there's a rest day and followed by a day that's lats and triceps. So literally we're hitting lats and triceps now twice in the first 3 days of training. So we have it on day 1 and on day 4. And then the next day is hamstrings and abs. So that's like a pretty simple, straightforward day. You just do some hamstrings. We have a superset of leg curls to RDL. So it's literally the same as the leg extension to the walking lunge where we go short lengthened. And then we have weighted hip extensions as another movement there. So once again, just 6 total sets for hamstrings. Then there's some abs and calf work. And you could skip that as we talked about or do it. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to be super taxing. And then the final day of the training cycle is upper back and arms. And so in this upper back work, we're also going to get a ton of lats. So we have a wide grip pull down. And our dude, Paul Carter, would argue that wide grip pull downs are actually the most lats, whereas I tend to use them more for upper back stimulus. But regardless, the lats are going to be getting some stimulus. We can be sure that the lats are being hit 3 times at some level over the course of the week. And then we have another back movement and then some arm specific stuff, including the medial tricep cable press that I know you love. Yeah. Oh yeah. And tricep. Yeah. So we have triceps 3 times a week as well, because there's one exercise on that final day too. So that's more or less the high level overview, and then glad to dig into anything else that you want to bring up.
Yeah. So are you planning on maybe hitting on like the progressions from this standpoint? Is it going to be more just because I know we'll add some myo reps, more rest pause, some partials. Are you going to be doing that a little bit more towards the lat and tricep stuff? Is it going to be more biased towards that?
Yeah. So my goal is to actually not take you even to probably 1 or 2 reps from failure on the demanding movements that are not the priority areas. So when you think of your like pendulum squat and your walking lunges and your RDLs, and shit, there's what else is demanding. That's not too many more demanding movements, but those ones specifically, we're probably not going to touch more than 2 RIR even in the final week on those. And then we will see faster progressions to failure on the priority muscle groups. And one of the really nice things about the specialization on lats and the way that I progress things is that because those are all pretty much going to be limited by the short position, we can really get into failure quickly and then get past failure quickly into partials and, like you said, myo reps or rest pause sets and lengthen sets, bottom range of motion sets and things like that. We'll also be doing drop sets. That's the new one that we reintroduced last cycle. And I've been doing it in my own training, and huge fan of drop sets. I really have been slow playing drop sets. They were something I loved back in 15, 20 years ago when I used to train. And I moved away from them because it seemed like evidence space was a bit down on them as far as a productivity tool. And then now there's this, meta-analysis and a number of other things that focus on drop sets and other kind of time efficient methods like myo reps and rest pause sets and things like that. And I've just really become such a huge fan of the drop set. It's so great because sometimes a rest pause set, by keeping the same weight, you have to rest, and then you still only get 3 to 4 reps. And when you do a drop set, you can reduce the weight, go immediately into it and get 3 or 4 reps and not even have to rest, still get those effective reps in there for the stimulus. Given what we know about hypertrophy now and the fact that it responds primarily to mechanical tension or tension on the muscle, and that the muscle doesn't actually really know how much weight you're lifting, just how much tension it receives, I think evidence at this point supports that a drop set would be, in theory, just as effective as doing a rest pause set.
Yeah. When you added those in for the chest last, I was like, man, I haven't had a burn in my chest like that in a long freaking time. Yeah. Now, would those work as well with back?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Okay. I used them on. So I actually did something really cool in my own training that maybe you'll get the pleasure of at the end of this cycle. So we have a couple times where we have a full range of motion set, and then we do a rest, and then we have a bottom range or a lengthened range of motion set. And so what I did on my program at the end of the meso is I would take that lengthened set and I would do that set to failure, even add a couple descending partials maybe. And then I would do a drop set, but instead of dropping just to the weight that I did for the full range of motion set, which would only be maybe 20%, I'll drop 20% below the first set, which would be 40% below the lengthened set. and then continue going. And it's crazy because you're like, man, I'm dropping 40%. I should be able to get so many reps. And yet still I'll get 5 or something along those lines because you're just so trashed from doing that lengthened position for 8 reps to failure. Yeah, a number of ways to implement drop sets. And I think we can get creative with it.
If you were doing a lengthened set there on that second set, would that drop set be lengthened or would that be a full range of motion at that point then?
Yeah, full range of motion. And then I would take it into partials once you can't get full range of motion anymore.
On that drop set.
Yeah, on the drop set.
Okay, I could see. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, man, that sounds freaking brutal. Okay, I had a couple other questions there on that. So obviously implementing those things, are you going to like increase? I think you answered this. Is the volume going to be straight sets or is it going to be those kind of intensity techniques that and did you find that you did, because you added in more exercises, maybe more frequency, where you were able to increase the volume, like in terms of number of sets on like lats and triceps?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see me include too many more straight sets. I think most of the volume increase or most of the stimulus increase will be working closer to and beyond failure and then adding in rest pause sets, drop sets, things like that. Okay.
So again, the added frequency, training closer to failure on this particular muscle group, and then adding in more of those, like you said, lengthened or those more intensity techniques as we get further. And then the other muscle groups, not going to have as many intensity techniques, maybe none. And then those will stay a little bit further from failure compared to the.
Yeah, that would be the plan. I do think that we'll probably include some of them on lateral delt and bicep work, just because they're small muscle groups. I don't think it's going to take a ton out of you to do them, but we're certainly not going to see a lot of that on the quad and hamstring, more dominant stuff.
Which really is how it's been for me for a while. And we really haven't added a ton of that in from I guess you did add in some, you did it. Yeah, you added in some partials and stuff like that on leg extensions and curls and stuff.
We may get there. We're already at 2 reps from failure and 1 rep from failure, and we're in week 2. I could see a point where we do add a couple partials into leg extensions or leg curls, but at that point, hey, you're doing more stimulus on the leg extension, leg curl. You probably don't need to worry about increasing the load on the second movement because you're already doing more on the first movement and it's not a priority muscle group. We'll probably play it like that.
One thing I did notice too is it seemed like on the tricep and lat stuff in particular, maybe not so much lat stuff, but there's one exercise that I know for sure where in previous mesocycles, you had me doing a length and partial set. So for example, the one that I'm thinking of is cable overhead tricep. In that second set, those are 2 just regular full range of motion sets. Is there anything behind that? Or is it just, hey, let's just switch it up a little bit there with that?
I guess I probably should have clarified this with you, but what I've realized is that when you do a 1-arm overhead tricep extension where it's set pretty high so that it's a lengthened overload, you actually really can't get a full extension. If you go to full extension, the cable no longer is aligned with the arm. So it almost becomes a lengthened partial just by nature of trying to keep in line with the cable. I think it's not a lengthened partial in the sense that you're doing 60% of the range of motion, but you'll definitely feel that stopping point toward the top. That's usually about, if you're looking at my arm right now, about that, where you're not all the way up, but you're also not just working this lengthened range right in here either. It's probably like up there is where the stopping point is.
It's funny you say that because I have noticed that even if I didn't I did feel like it was always 60 to 70% most of the time anyways with that. I was like, this really doesn't feel too much different than so that makes sense there on that. Cool. I know we're running out of time here. Anything else that you want to hit on with it? I'm pretty well there.
Yeah. The plan for us, as far as our last discussion, was that we were due to these rotating specialization cycles. So I could see maybe 2 mesocycles here doing lats and triceps, seeing where that takes us, and then maybe 2 mesocycles doing something else, and then 2 mesocycles doing something else, and always rotating through with 2 major focus muscle groups, I think makes a ton of sense and really falls in line with that research that we've been so giddy on from the data-driven guys.
Yeah, increasing volume, but again, over short periods of time. And again, as in the research shows, just with one muscle group here, in this case, obviously 2. Also, one thing too, that I think this can be helpful from is before we started this, I was experiencing some pain here, like a little just discomfort. And that's pretty much gone without having to do too much curling, right? So I think this can also be a good thing to help with some maybe like minor like niggles that you have on other muscle groups as well, to give that some time to rest, which I think will be part of this experiment. Is, for example, I've had some issues with elbows. So it's, what is that volume for me? And it's probably going to be different for each muscle group as well, too. And that's kind of part of why I wanted to do this as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting though, because your elbow tendonitis was also from tricep movements, was it not? It was, yeah. So now we're doing a tricep specialization, and that's great that so far we're only 2 weeks in, but it's great that so far we've been able to choose movements that seem to line up biomechanically in a manner that isn't causing you further pain.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it will be cool to see how this goes. I'm sure next time we have you on, we'll have more information on this as well. Anything else you want to go over today? Anything we missed or anything like that? Anywhere where you want to lead the audience to or anything like that before I let you go?
Nope.
Cool. As normal, you know where to find Bryan at this point if you've listened. We'll link everything that we've had in the past as well, too, in the show notes. Appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.